College football nerds, we are doing some off-season content. Give you a second to pick yourself up off the floor. We are talking in this one about the top 5 returning quarterbacks in college football for 2021. I've got Josh with me, not just in spirit. He's in here talking to me in this little computer box. Obviously, want to remind you, as we do every video, please like and subscribe. Helps us out a ton. And we don't want you to disappear until August. So we're going to do some off-season content for you. And I'm going to get right into it because sometimes my intros go too long. Josh, top 5. We're going to go 1 to 5 because after 5, we're going to talk about some players that we thought about but didn't put in our top 5. I'm going to start with DJ Uiagalelei at Clemson. People saw him and forgot about him, but I was really impressed. Turns out when you look hindsight 2020, of course, but when you look back at the 2020 teams, Notre Dame's defense was pretty good, and what the spot work that we saw with DJ versus Boston College versus Clemson, I think he held his own and really solidified the hype that he had coming into the season. That's my number 1. Give me your number 1.
It's also DJ Uiagalelei. I was really impressed, and we talked a lot about Clemson in their rematch with Notre Dame, that we didn't think that he versus Lawrence was really going to be the big factor. We thought the difference would be the injury situation for Clemson's defense, and I think that was justified. I'm not sure how much of a drop-off there really is behind Trevor Lawrence. People say that all the time, and we laugh about it when you've got a top 5 draft pick, and you say, oh, we're not going to miss him that much. This next guy's really good. Top 5 draft picks are almost impossible to replace. But we saw it happen last year where Alabama lost Tua Tagovailoa. They replaced him with Mac Jones, and they got better production out of the quarterback position they'd had the year prior. I saw more flashes from Uiagalelei than we had seen from Jones when he replaced Tua the year before himself. I think the sky is the limit for him. I think he's already shown that he's a good player, and I think, importantly, he's going to have a better receiving core next year, really, than Lawrence had this year due to the injury to Ross and really a lot of guys that were banged up down the depth chart for Clemson at the receiver position.
I agree with that, and we've talked now for a few years, and Bill Connolly's big on this too, that returning production and quality production at wide receiver really dictates how your offense is going to go, not just quarterback. So I agree with you. It's going to be a big year for him. Spencer Rattler is my number 2, and I thought about putting him number 1. He had a great game against Florida, which we all know Florida's defense was not good at all this year, but he held his own throughout the season, and I was really impressed with his poise and really just his physical traits. The release is wonderful. He's got a rocket arm. He's obviously mobile enough. Not a runner. Like he can run if he needs to, but he doesn't have to. My only concern with him at number 2, there's high expectations for Oklahoma this year. He had some games this year where he would have a number of drives stitched together where he just kind of disappeared, where he just didn't show up on third down or had just a brain fart. That kind of thing concerns me in where college football is going now, where you're going to have a couple of games throughout the year where if you have a couple or 3 drives in a row where you don't have any production, you're going to lose the game. So that is a little bit scary for me, but again, he's still early in his career, so we might be expecting too much. Give me your number 2.
My number 2 is also Spencer Rattler. I agree with you. I felt like as the year went on, he got better. He was not as consistent as I think Oklahoma fans were used to. His skill ceiling is extremely high. So with him, a lot of it is going to come down to his consistency. I will also say it's going to come down a lot probably to how well the offensive line plays going into next year, because I felt like the offensive line was also a little bit inconsistent and that affected him. But you combine him again with a really good receiving core with some young talent that's starting to step up. I mean, everybody knows guys like Mims or maybe Bridges, but I think Hazelwood is a guy that has the talent to be an household name. Hasn't quite hit that point yet. I think Oklahoma's offense is destined to return to form, which is a high bar for them in the next year or two.
Yeah, you mentioned the wide receivers. I think that's a good point. Just like Clemson, look, Rambo leaving Oklahoma tells you a lot about how stacked they are at wide receiver coming into the next year. Number 3 for me is Sam Howell at North Carolina. Didn't get the win against Texas A&M, but that's a guy who I think, even though there was some NFL talent around him this year, he was the guy that stood out. And this is 2 years in a row now that I've been really impressed with him. I think coming in as a freshman, he kind of hit the ground running, and he was really better than I expected, especially given that there are some, not a great offensive line that he's playing behind. Did have some great skill players, but still, for a team in North Carolina that's still not quite there for top-level talent, he showed that he was ready to play. Give me your number 3.
My next would be McCall from Coastal Carolina. Obviously, that's a team that surprised everybody. And the thing that strikes me about McCall is that he's young. He's going to be a sophomore next year. I think when you consider that he did what he did as a freshman, the potential for him to, maybe even reach higher heights is definitely out there. And it reminds me a lot of what we saw at UCF, right? When they beat Auburn, they did it in large part because they found a guy that was essentially an ultimate Frisbee player that turned out to be a high-level quarterback. And I think that may be the situation at Coastal Carolina. You sometimes luck out with finding a guy that's a much better quarterback than you think. And where a lot of people would have maybe Slovis at USC as being that 3-star kind of guy that shows up, I think Slovis is good. I'm a little concerned about his 2020, and I think McCall is probably a more underrated pick along the same logical vein.
My only concern there is, one, the average level of competition they faced. It's hard to glean from that, whether or not it's the quarterback or the system, or you just happen to have a senior team. But I did consider him. My number 4 is Matt Corral at Ole Miss. This is tough for me because, again, we are kind of talking about the potential of it being a system situation. He, to me, is scary because he has shown he can be a head case. In terms of talent and skill, I think he's got it. Like, he's got a great arm. He's got a good head about him at most times. He can find an open wide receiver when everything breaks down. I love that about him. But I also worry that he's going to throw the random interception when he's just throws to the wrong guy on the goal line. It seems like every one of his interceptions on the goal line. That's my concern for him. But yet again, we're looking at a Lane Kiffin offense. If we're talking about production numbers in this coming season and not necessarily if the guy's going to be a first-round draft quarterback, that's my guy at number 4. If you don't have him in your 4 or 5, I'd love for you to talk about him. And if you do, then we can when we get there, but also give me number 4.
So I don't have him in my top 5, and I'll go ahead and say my issue with Corral is consistency. I question the fact that whether you're going to get the same performance from him day in and day out. And it was bizarre that they scored almost every drive against Alabama and turn around and get almost shut down by an Arkansas team that was far less talented. I think teams figured out that if you played him in a zone and you mix coverage, he does really dumb things. And his production was a lot more limited in the second half of the year. I think we will see that going forward with him. People are going to adjust to Kiffin's offense and the way Corral works. And I'll see another one that was in my top 5. I'll go ahead and note it, was Sam Howell. And as much as I think Sam Howell is a good quarterback, it's the inverse of the situation we talked before with receivers. I think they're going to miss Brown and Newsome a lot. Daz Newsome was an incredible player. Brown was a great receiver downfield for them. And I do think Sam Howell is a very good quarterback, but I think they're also going to feel those absences. Given the level of competition we're talking about in a top 5, that holds him back a little bit from the rest of the pack. So for number 4 for me, and number 4 and number 5, I'll tell you I'm kind of going on a limb for both of them. I'm going to say Bryce Young from Alabama at number 4. There are a lot of new pieces in that Alabama offense. They're going to have a new look receiving core. They're going to have a new quarterback. They're going to have some new linemen. But what I have seen from Alabama in the past several years is if they have high-level quarterback play, they have enough 5-star talent on that team for that guy to be very good. Be it McCarron, be it Tagovailoa, be it Mac Jones. Guys that are high-level talents at start on that offense are generally easily top 5 QB rating guys on a consistent basis. And that's why Bryce Young ends up number 4. And if I can I go ahead and say number 5 because it kind of pairs with it. My number 5 is C.J. Stroud for the same reasons at Ohio State. I know Stroud didn't really get much of a chance to show what he can do last year, but as a recruit, I thought he was really impressive. Athletically, when he was on the field, you could tell that he's the kind of guy in a dual threat offense that likes to run the quarterback, can really strain a defense. Same stuff we talked about with Justin Fields. If you've got a really good athlete at the quarterback position in the offense that Ohio State's running, it creates a lot of one-on-one matchups and it really strains defenses. I think Bryce Young and Stroud, even though they haven't started a game, both those guys are going to end up being top 5 quarterbacks. And I see it going into almost every year when they start making preseason predictions. Like Kellen Mond was a top 5 quarterback in a lot of rankings just because he was a senior last year. Guys don't tend to progress a ton in their 3rd, 4th year as a starter. And your Heisman Trophy candidates, of the 3 best quarterbacks, at least one of them will be a guy that hadn't started before and you didn't know who he was. And I think Young and Stroud are both going to end up in the top 5 in most statistical categories.
My number 5 is a little bit out on a limb. Caleb Ellaby at Western Michigan. He last year put up 11.2 yards per attempt, 18 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, 195 QB rating. On its face, that's incredible. He was up there, top 5, every statistic, at least on averages. It was a weird year for numbers, total numbers because of COVID. The one concern I have for him is the same concern I have about Trey Lance at North Dakota State. It's every time you watch his tape, he's got a long time to throw the ball. And he's not having to make pinpoint accurate throws. He got a lot of yardage in RPO slants, but it's hard to argue with 11.2 yards per attempt. So I think he's a guy that was on nobody's radar coming into the season, who, if he has another season like last year, is going to be probably a top, maybe 4th or 5th quarterback selected, which is saying a lot for a guy at Western Michigan coming out of nowhere. So that's my number 5. I think if you plug him in at a lot of other big-time programs with big-time talent around him, he'd put up some numbers. You gave me your number 5, right? So let's talk about who wasn't in your top 5.
I think the most obvious one for both of us is JT Daniels. And this comes down to my continued hesitation with him. I took a tremendous amount of heat when he started as at Georgia, and he put up good numbers for saying, hey, let's back off a bit. I don't know how much you want to take from the fact that, yeah, you beat up a Missouri team that had a bad defense and had quit. You beat up a Mississippi State team that was missing most of the defensive starters in that game. Really wasn't a great defense to start, to start with. And then we see the Cincinnati game, and statistically, in many ways, he was good. But if you go back and watch it, they hit a Hail Mary at the end of the first half that put points on the board in a long play. The consistency hasn't been there, and they didn't score a lot of points. And really, throughout all his starts, the point production didn't quite match the statistics. I am concerned for a team that's losing, at least some offensive linemen. They've got a lot of receivers coming back, but the receiver play hasn't been consistent. I don't know where JT Daniels is going to end up. Cincinnati was really the only good defense they played. He was okay in that game. He didn't really wow me. I think he could end up being a top 5 quarterback. I think he could also be a major disappointment. And I know he's going to be at the top of a lot of Heisman lists. I think of all the high-level quarterbacks, he's probably the most boom-bust. And you mentioned Matt Corral. I think JT Daniels quietly is as much a boom-bust player as Matt Corral is going into next year. Now, the run game and whatnot is going to even things up for Georgia. They're still probably going to have a good defense, maybe not as good as they were last year, at least when they were healthier. But JT Daniels is probably the biggest omission from our lists.
Yeah, and you did take a lot of heat. You took a lot of heat, and it's funny because everybody wanted you to eat crow after the Mississippi State game. Mississippi State ranked 105th in passing defense this year, and they had guys out. So that's tough. For me, I don't want to say you were wrong. I don't want to say we were wrong on JT Daniels, but I don't want to say we're right either. I think it's something that right now it's an incomplete. It's very possible that he comes out with a full offseason, spring and fall camp, and he comes out and he's just balling. But we saw a lot of him that we also saw that worried us when he was at USC. Look, I think he had a good game, not a great game against Cincinnati. Take that game off the board. The other three defenses he played were Missouri, South Carolina, and Mississippi State. The highest ranked of which was Missouri, and they were 84th. I don't know what you do with that. Those are the 84th best pass defense. Everybody's shredding them. Everybody's shredding them. LSU put up, I think, 47 points on them. So, and we know how bad they were. So I agree with you. I think it's an incomplete for me right now. I'm not ready to say he's not going to be great. And at Georgia, if you're just good and consistent with the defense they're going to put on the field, you're going to win ball games. So we'll see. Give me one more before we wrap this up.
So the one more I'll add is Michael Penix Jr. He's obviously the one that kind of got let off the lists. I am hesitant to put him in the top 5, given that he'll be coming off an ACL and his mobility is a part of his game. Will he be healthy enough to start? Yes, but a lot like Daniels wasn't ready to start at the beginning of this past year for Georgia. I don't necessarily think Penix will be either. I'll also say Penix, when they were playing games that they probably shouldn't have been able to win, he made wow plays that put them in a position to win those games. But he also, I think, maybe a lot of people miss this, he's not overly consistent when they're playing people they should beat. His ceiling is high enough that he can make any play and make any throw, but his floor has actually not been terribly high. So I'm also hesitant to put Penix terribly high because I want to see him put up great yards and stats on a consistent basis, which he really didn't do last year, even when healthy. So that's another honorable mention, one that's going to be high on a lot of lists. I mean, there's other guys too, Keaton Slovis or Tyler Show. There's a bunch of them that are kind of clumped in that group, but I think Penix is probably the biggest name, and there's several reasons why I wouldn't want to put him in the top 5 right now.
Yeah, I think if you play that Ohio State game even 10 times, he's not putting up 500 yards in 5 of them. He hit some deep shots, but you're right. The meat and potatoes of that offense is really not what he does great. He doesn't keep the chains moving, and that's what you need in modern offense. Yes, it's great that you can hit a bomb, but even the Penn State game, he made some really great plays at the very end of the game, but he wasn't necessarily great throughout in terms of consistently moving the ball down the field in an offense. So I agree with you on that one. All right, that's it for y'all. We wanted to make these pretty quick. Wasn't as quick as we wanted, but it's off season, so you love it. You're going to watch every bit of it, and you're going to comment below and let us know what you think is your 1 or 5 or 10 quarterbacks that you've got being hot for the 2021 season, and maybe 1 or 2 that you're not high on. Let's get at it in the comments, and we'll meet you down there. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week, and God bless.